ตุรุนแรงทางการเมืองระลอกนี้สำหรับการชุมนุมของกปปส.ยืดเยื้อมาไม่ต่ำกว่า4 เดือนแล้วนะคะขณะที่ด้านหนึ่งสื่อไทยเองก็พยายามเกาะติดสถานการณ์พยายามวิเคราะห์สถานการณ์ก็มีเสียงวิพากษ์วิจารณ์สำหรับการทำงานของสื่อไทยเช่นเดียวกับสื่อต่างประเทศนะคะที่ครั้งนี้เข้ามาเกาะติดสถานการณ์กันมากมายทั้งสื่อที่เข้ามาแบบชั่วคราวหรือว่าสื่อที่อยู่ในเมืองไทยกันระยะนานๆแล้วนะคะและติดตามกันมาอย่างต่อเนื่องน่าสนใจว่ามุมมองของสื่อมวลชนต่างชาติที่ติดตามสถานการณ์รู้จักตัวละครการเมืองไทยมีมุมมองอย่างไรนะคะวันนี้ดิฉันเชิญสื่อจากต่างชาติจาก2ประเทศค่ะที่ติดตามการเมืองไทยมายาวนานไม่ใช่เฉพาะครั้งนี้นะคะอยู่กันมาไม่ต่ำกว่า10 ปีแล้วนะคะสำหรับแต่ละท่านและมีมุมมองที่น่าจะนำมาแลกเปลี่ยนกันได้ค่ะสำหรับวิกฤตทางการเมืองที่กำลังเกิดขึ้นในไทยนะคะท่านแรกค่ะคุณเนอร์มอลกอชผู้สื่อข่าวจากหนังสือพิมพ์ The Straits Times จากสิงคโปร์แต่ว่าเป็นคนอินเดียนะคะลูกครึ่งอินเดียเยอรมันอยู่เมืองไทยมา11 ปีค่ะอีกท่านค่ะคุณมาวันมากันมาคาค่ะจากหนังสือพิมพ์ The Edge Review นะคะนอกจากจะติดตามการเมืองไทยแล้วก็ติดตามระดับภูมิภาคเป็นคนศรีลังกาค่ะ Thank you both of you for joining me for ตอบโจทย์ program It's been very complicated and we have been discussing Thai politics for so long I am sure you must be asked by people at home like if your mother call you or when you call your mother how would you describe situation in Thailand if you have only 1 minute Marwan
Well I think Thailand's politics now is getting increasingly violent and moving to a direction that has no precedent especially what we have seen since the elections and what is worrying is that the country could slide further and further down into a volatile situation from which it might be much more difficult to extricate itself, to pull back.
We really need more time to elaborate. What about you, Nirmal?
I would say that the conventional view of Thailand from outside as a sort of peaceful and homogeneous country where everybody lives in harmony has been breaking down and is in the process of breaking down. There are regional divisions, there are political divisions, and the mechanisms for conflict resolution are not working. It's very polarized and there's very little middle ground left. It is challenging this whole stereotypical view of Thailand at peace with itself.
When discussing about deep political polarization in Thailand, perhaps from the view of foreign media, people tend to see that is it oversimplification? Perhaps you have your own audience when you try to explain the situation in Thailand, like whether it's class war, whether it's the war between elite and rural people. Do you have trouble in simplifying the situation in Thailand?
Yes, actually yes, because there's limited space, and I'm lucky I'm a print journalist, so I do have more space than most television journalists, for example, who have 1.5 minutes or something. But a lot of the articles are basically on background. And then you have to bring in all the elements you mentioned, you know, the class issue, politics, and so on and so forth. And they are all part of the mix. So you have to convey that in the backgrounding. And of course, you have to go back in history to 2001, 2006, the evolution of this conflict. So you need to spend at least, I would say, 50% of the article explaining all this.
So in fact, every new article you wrote new part for only 50%.
Well, yeah, you have to find creative ways of saying the same thing again and again.
What about you, Marwan? Do you really have to provide background context of Thailand? And what's the problem with simplification?
Well, I mean, you need to provide context. Let's say, for instance, you have the opposition party, which calls itself the Democrat Party, yet it chooses to boycott an election. And naturally, an international audience is going to say why a party that calls itself Democrat is boycotting. Or you get the PDRC, which calls itself, you know, People's Democratic Reform Committee. When you have a name like that or a title of an organization, and then you start saying that one thing that they're doing is sabotaging elections and stopping people from voting, there is a contradiction in what they're doing and their name. We also saw this with the PAD, People's Alliance for Democracy, which stated it had democratic intentions, but was quite happy to support a coup. So for an international audience, you need to explain these things, because what's very clear in Thai politics is what might be standard ways of telling a straightforward story is not there. You know, if there are leftist groups, for instance, you could say they are drawn from a trade union or they are drawn from a leftist tradition, and immediately your readers might be quick to associate what that means. But in Thailand, there is always this very clear contradiction between the name of an organization, a political organization, its stated objectives, and actually what it does on the street.
At the moment, people see that perhaps Thailand is now in deep trouble because its vacuum situation of the government, of the power. How do you see it, Nirmal?
Yes, I think there's a lot of concern, especially outside the country. There's a lot of interest, for example, in the Straits Times, because it's so important for Singapore. Thailand is a huge investment destination for Singapore. There is a lot of concern that Thailand is now losing momentum. And because of this political stalemate, the economy will slow down, it will go at idle speed, and there will be no new investment, no new expenditure and disbursement for we don't know how long, maybe a few months. And that will slowly erode confidence and slowly sort of act as a drag on the economic dynamism of Thailand. So I think there's a lot of concern over that, because Thailand is a big engine of the region.
Are we on the verge of becoming sick man of Asia?
No, I think that characterization is unfair, because Thailand is the second largest economy in Southeast Asia, and it certainly has a lot of its fundamentals fairly secure, occasionally buffeted by challenges that are caused by the protests. And if you look at, I mean, as an example, if you look at what happened in 2010 when the Democrats were in government and the red shirts were on the streets, the foreign direct investment that flowed into Thailand was quite a record. Investments were secure. The economy hummed along, and people were quite impressed. So this time around, also people are looking at what would choke the economy. Let's say, for instance, they shut down the airport, then that could have been troubling. The tourism sector is complaining because the protests are in the heart of the glitzy shopping, upmarket tourism, mecca, so to speak. But maybe they can ride this storm out. It's very unfair at this stage to say Thailand is going to end up as a sick man of Southeast Asia, because it's far from it.
But economy is your big concern, Nirmal. Do you see Thailand is becoming sick man of Asia?
No, I agree with Marwan. I think that is too extreme. If you look at 2010, when there was actually shooting and battles in the middle of Bangkok, the export economy was untouched. Not a single factory lost a day of work. So it kept humming along. And Thailand has still got a very positive brand image. The tourists come back again and again. Tourist traffic, it may dip a little bit, but every year it consistently goes up.
It's a very still efficient image of Thailand.
Yeah. And also you see a slight separation. People, Thailand has a lot of millions of tourists coming, and a lot of them understand that if there's a problem, it's in Bangkok. Phuket and the islands is fine. So you have a huge percentage of your tourism actually going to places like Phuket and the islands, and it's not affected.
I also went to protest site and met so many tourists, either from Germany, from America. They have so much fun in the protest, and they said they do not really listen to travel alert warning from their government. Do you see it the same way as those tourists?
So maybe protests must become the new tourist attraction of Bangkok. Maybe they should have permanent protests, and tourists can have fun like the way you saw, like going to the zoo, going to a temple.
Is it too wide to become like that? Because Tourism Authority of Thailand is even trying to promote it as perhaps festival-like atmosphere could be more selling point of Thailand.
Thais are very practical. Maybe they are seeing opportunity even in chaos.
But for you, does it confuse you that it's happening again in Bangkok? This is not the first time to see protests in the main central area of Bangkok.
So we've seen protests of this nature since 2006, when the PAD was on the streets to get rid of the Thaksin government, and we've had this cycle. And if one looks at why this is happening, probably two themes that I find keep getting repeated is that it's a lack of faith by Thais in one, lack of faith in the electoral process. That's why you have people on the streets today. They don't believe that they can trust the elections, because whether you like it or not, political parties affiliated with Mr. Thaksin have won successive elections since 2001. So you have those who were traditional supporters of the Democrats now feeling quite helpless because their party has been outperformed, and they are left with no alternative but show their frustrations on the street. And on the other hand, those who are sympathetic of Mr. Thaksin, the red shirts, have lost or increasingly losing faith in the judicial system. I mean, they don't trust the courts. And what is dangerous, and this is a point Nirmal made earlier, is that these are the beginnings of a system breaking down, is when there is no trust in two vital institutions that are necessary for any vibrant democracy.
Do you see it the same way with Marwan, the breaking down of the system in Thailand?
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, just the other day, I was interviewing some Thais, and they said both sides are shouting so loudly that we don't know who to listen to and who is telling the truth anymore. And that's quite a common refrain. People are confused as to what is the truth and what isn't, you know, because every episode has several different explanations. There are so many conspiracy theories, and it is a very black and white situation. It's extremely polarized again. So people are entrenched in their beliefs, and it's almost like watching. It's almost as if it's choreographed, a choreographed breakdown of trust and belief in the system, and people looking for, grasping at straws, looking for people to follow. For example, I think one of the reasons that Suthet talks about has been so successful is that he appeared at the right time, and he grasped the challenge and went for it and started leading this movement at the right time. And I think a lot of people needed someone like that to come up and say, okay, I will do this, I will lead it, you know, and they followed him.
Both of you have been traveling a lot to many provinces all over Thailand. Do you see deep division really happening between yellow shirt, red shirt? Because at some point, foreign media perhaps trying to see it as class war struggle in Thailand, or the inequality between people in Bangkok and people in provinces. Do you see it this way?
I think there's an element of that. I mean, Thailand has been a feudal society for a long time, and the democratic transition is historically fairly recent and is still underway. So there's an element of class war and feudalism and so forth in this whole mix. Now, if you go around the provinces, another thing I've discovered is it is not monolithic. For example, the red shirt villages, which some people say are exclusionary zones, that you can be only red shirt. This is not true. You have red shirt villages with people in there who are yellow shirts. So in the town of Chiang Mai, it's considered red shirt territory, but there's also a fairly good degree of support for, say, the Democrat Party in Chiang Mai. They don't do that badly, actually. So nothing is simple. Nothing is what it seems. I think it was the army chief, General Prayut, who a couple of months ago said that Thailand is divided right down to the Tambon level, you know. And I think he was right. You find in every village people of different beliefs, and the question is whether they can compromise and live together and coexist happily while respecting each other's beliefs.
It's still very big question in Thailand, how we coexist and live happily together. What's the subtlety you see from visiting many provinces in Thailand?
Well, I mean, people are following the events happening in Bangkok. And in places like Khon Kaen, the northeast beyond, they are now, they have a feeling of we are the other, not the elite. I mean, people who take up, who speak at the PDRC, you know, sometimes have statements like 300,000 Bangkok votes are equal to 15 million northeastern votes. That might win cheers and whistles in Bangkok, and the supporters of the PDRC might feel proud of making this political equation, you know, that they are superior, that is, their votes matter. But the people listening to these speeches are also hit by this sense of hierarchy, and they will bide their time and wait for an occasion to strike back, to remind people who look down on them that they are all equal.
Is it the issue that worries you when you see the situation in Thailand? More bloodshed could
Well,
be
it could,
happening.
you know, I mean, so far the worst is what happened in 2010 in terms of protest versus the state. Yeah. Of course, when you talk of bloodshed, we can also talk of the South, but let's keep that aside for a moment. Yeah. This time around, it seems like the bloodshed is not imminent. You've had, I think, about 15 or 16 people who have been killed and about 600 injured. And remember, we're talking of a situation that is now in its 4th month. So I'm not sure whether this is a result of police efficiency or whether because you have a female prime minister, she is a bit more conciliatory and probably wants to keep things under, keep things in a non-violent manner. I'm not sure what the circumstances, but clearly the numbers indicate that the violence is not as, still not as bad as 2010. However, when you look at these signs that are emerging of a society slightly disintegrating, lines crossed that were previously not crossed, you know, this is fertile ground for, you know, people who want to stoke violence to step in and take it down that road.
Normal, what do you see as factors which may lead to more violence, more bloodshed in Thailand? Because right now, Richard also saying that perhaps they are gathering this Sunday, the group who are supporting the government.
So the longer the stalemate continues, the greater the risk of violence, because someone will try and force a solution rather than carry on with this very damaging war of attrition, which is, you know, eroding the credibility of the government slowly and threatening the government. And then it takes a lot of energy to keep up this movement to bring the government down, and meanwhile the economy is not doing that great. And it seems to be going further and further down a dead end, you know, because we still don't know how the election's going to, we still don't know how the election's going to turn out, whether there's going to be another round of voting, what's going to happen after that. We still don't know. It could be a few months. So the further and further it goes down a dead end and there's no light at the end, there is always a chance that someone will press a button and say, let's end this, let's make a decisive move now. You know, and there are plenty of elements we've already seen on a smaller scale, what people are capable of doing. We saw it at Luxy. We saw it just a couple of days ago. So there's always a chance that someone will make a preemptive move and say, okay, we have to sort this out and get it done. And that could see an explosion of violence. And I'm concerned because if you look back at 2006 was a bloodless coup. Then it was 2008, there was demonstrations, there was some violence. 2009, there was demonstrations, more violence. 2010, more violence. Every subsequent episode of violence has been greater than the previous ones.
Do you see the current one is the most severe, the most violent when compared with previous ones?
No, but it has the potential to be most violent. Because again, the longer the stalemate drags on, there'll be there's a lot of saber rattling on both sides, and there's a lot of maneuvering. It's like a chess game where you make a move and then you go away and then come back and make another move, and it's a long and painful affair. But the longer it continues, the more desperate people will also get, and then that's not a good sign.
What can you share with us in terms of peaceful solution? I see both of you met with former Prime Minister Abhisit Vejjajiva, and one of his offering is to have interim government, to have neutral Prime Minister and interim government. Do you see it as appropriate solution for Thailand in this juncture?
Well, I mean, Kun Abisit seems to be quite confident that he has an answer to solve the deadlock that Nirmal was talking about. And I think people should give his suggestion a hearing, and it would be good if the government can respond, because he has obviously decided to come out at this time. The problem is, and we kept asking him this question and he didn't give us a convincing answer, where in the current constitution can this mechanism be, or where is the mechanism to achieve this? Because Thailand's constitution does not permit a appointed prime minister. You don't have a sitting parliament to even consider new amendment. So unless there is a coup, which is always possible, that is a military coup.
You see, it's still always possible.
It's always there. Thailand has very politically ambitious military high command. There could be even a judicial coup. I mean, the recent ruling by the court, the civil court, further hampers the government. Or there could be, say, the National Anti-Corruption Commission ruling against the government, and the government collapses. I mean, those are possibilities for a vacuum to be created. But there is no constitutional provision for Prime Minister Yingluck just to say, I'm leaving and I can appoint. She can't do that because she's bound by the law. So that is why these suggestions are good, and I think Kun Abhisit's suggestion should be given a good hearing. But I think what the Democrats and the others who think along that line need to suggest is, how is it legally and constitutionally possible?
I think this whole idea of an interim prime minister, like we were just talking about, interim caretaker prime minister, on the face of it sounds rational, and sort of a moderate interim solution to defuse this crisis. But again, the question is, how will that vacuum be created to allow the appointment of such a person, and also who is such a person? I mean, I don't see anybody in Thailand now, or I can't think of anyone in Thailand who would not be seen by one side or the other as already beholden to the other side, as a really honest, neutral figure which they talk about. So you've got two problems. How is this going to be created, this situation? And the second is, who is this person going to be?
That's a very big question for Thai people as well. Marwan, you are from Sri Lanka, and your country has been through lots of civil war, lots of violence in the past a few decades, 25 years. How can you draw experience from Sri Lanka in parallel with Thailand? What can we learn from Sri Lanka?
Well, first thing is, it's dangerous to say the Sri Lanka scenario will play out here, because each country's political conflicts are located and rooted in their own unique social context and political context. So the same with what happened in Burma, Myanmar, and Cambodia and Laos and whatever. So Thailand's situation is unique. But if one was to draw lessons, I think there are some lessons that are general that apply to the Thai scenario. The first thing is that people in this country begin to feel that they are not equal and treated with the same respect by the state, or institutions of the state don't give them the same fair play, say, justice. So they feel a sense of alienation and marginalization. That is always the beginning of what could evolve into something much serious. And I think in Thailand there are large sections of the country, let's say in the northeast for instance, and in the north, who look at the Bangkok ruling class, who have power, and who feel that, well, their ideas are almost determined to keep us down in what is still a semi-feudal society. And then these people who are kept down will start looking for alternatives. And how it's going to manifest itself is always a big question. In the Sri Lankan case, I mean, this process took about almost 25 years of a sense of alienation and marginalization by a minority before it became violent. And actually, you don't know that you're in what, for lack of a better expression, is a civil war until you're in it, you know. But whether Thailand is going to have this form, it's still unclear whether it's in what form it's going to take.
Seeing the scenes of violence in Kiev, in Ukraine, the protest has started about at the same time with PDRC. Do you see Thailand that the Thai people or Thai situation has to get worse before it can get better?
I think there's a good chance that it'll get worse before it'll get better. There is a chance that it'll happen, a good chance.
And from your experience, because you've been traveling around in the region, you see example from Philippines, from India. What can we learn from those countries to Thailand?
Well, in India, the states appoint their own chief ministers, elect their own chief ministers and their own state assemblies. So there's a considerable amount of decentralization. And another thing in India is that the results of the election commission is extremely powerful. Once the election process is handed over to the election commissioner, he has huge powers. And the election process is, of course, quite flawed. There is also vote buying. There is also thuggery and violence in elections. There is also populism. There is also pandering to class and caste differences, you know, people cultivating various vote banks. But at the end of the day, it all balances out and the election is respected. And there is also a role and a certain respect for independent institutions, the checks and balances, which has remained fairly stable. And if you look back in India in the 70s, Indira Gandhi, then Prime Minister, for a short period of time imposed a state of emergency and veered into authoritarianism. Newspaper editors were thrown in jail and so on and so forth. Then eventually she called elections because there's been this long tradition of democracy in India. And in the election, the electorate struck back. She was removed from office. In fact, she went to jail. And then, of course, she came out and history continued. But there's a sort of faith in India in elections. They go back to elections time and again, and they respect the result of elections.
There are so many questions still around for Thailand to be thinking of in order to get through this political juncture. Thank you very much for both of you for joining me. และทั้งหมดคือตอบโจทย์สำหรับวันนี้นะคะเป็นมุมมองของผู้สื่อข่าวต่างชาติทั้งสองท่านนะคะท่ามกลางสถานการณ์การเผชิญหน้าทางการเมืองที่กำลังเกิดขึ้นในไทยค่ะทั้งหมดคือที่นี่ไทย PBS สำหรับคืนนี้ค่ะดิฉันณัฐฐา โกมลวาทินสวัสดีค่ะ